Hello everyone. Thank you for your patience and welcome to the webinar titled Automatically Retrieving and Loading Data into Siebel CTMS from Multiple CRO Partners, presented by Proficient's Director of Clinical Trial Management Solutions, Padam Singh, and Michelle Engler, who is a Senior Solutions Architect in Proficient's Life Sciences practice. My name is Eugene Stefanov, and I am the Marketing Manager for Proficient's Life Sciences practice. Before I turn it over to Padam and Michelle, I'd like to cover some housekeeping items and then provide a brief overview of our Life Sciences practice. All participants on this call will be in listen-only mode. This means that everyone is on mute. You can submit questions to Padam and Michelle at any time today by typing your questions in the chat feature, which is located on the left side of your screen. Please do make sure your questions are stated clearly, and keep in mind other webinar participants will not see your questions or comments. Your questions to the speakers will be addressed as time allows towards the end of the presentation. And if you still have unanswered questions after the webinar or would like to request information about our solutions, feel free to use the contact information on the various slides throughout the presentation. You can also fill out the contact form on the Life Sciences section of Proficient's website. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded, and it will be sent to you within several days, along with a link to the PDF version of the presentation. Now that we covered the webinar logistics, I'd like to briefly talk about Proficient and our dedicated life sciences practice. So Proficient is an IT consulting company that offers a whole host of IT solutions for a variety of industries, including, of course, life sciences, healthcare, financial services, consumer products, retail, and insurance. We have employees and offices all over the world, including the ones you see on this slide. And as you may expect, most of our clients operate throughout North America and Europe. This slide here contains a bunch of facts about our company. And just to point out a few, we were founded in 1997. We are listed on the NASDAQ. And lastly, at the moment, we have a little over 2,000 employees. So since this is a life sciences webinar, I'll quickly cover what our dedicated practice is all about. Our practice has 4 separate divisions, including clinical trial management, clinical data management and EDC, safety and pharmacovigilance, and clinical data warehousing and analytics. We specialize in the implementation, cloud hosting, integration, and the use of a variety of applications, many of which you see right here, as well as provide some custom application development services to our clients. The Life Sciences team also works with the many other groups at Proficient to provide life sciences companies with services that aren't specific to clinical or safety applications, but instead are related to other areas of business within a life sciences company. And if you'd like to take a look at our solutions, feel free to visit the main website. All right, now that I've covered the housekeeping items, I'd like to pass it over to Padam and Michelle so they can introduce themselves.
Great, thank you, Eugene. So let me introduce myself. My name is Padam Singh, and I am the Practice Director for the Clinical Trial Management Solution practice within Proficient's Life Sciences business unit. I've been working in the industry for over 15 years now, and through that time almost exclusively been working with the Siebel clinical product. I've been with Proficient Life Sciences business unit for over 6 years now, and before that I was part of Accenture's pharma R&D practice and leading CTMS implementations there as well. And overall I've been part of now 30 implementations of of Siebel CTMS. And with me today, we have Michelle Engler, and I'll let Michelle introduce herself.
Thank you, Pram. This is Michelle Engler. I am a Senior Solutions Expert for Proficient Life Sciences. I have designed and developed many custom solutions in the life sciences industry over the past 16 years, and I'm particularly focused on migration solutions and projects for clinical trial systems. Today I will present with Param the details of a demo of the Siebel Clinical Transfer Utility.
Thanks, Michelle. So let's look at today's agenda. I'm going to kick off today with some introductory information about the business case for this type of integration, and really what industry trends are leading organizations to move towards this. I will also cover one specific organization's specific scenario and how they made the decision to go forward with this type of integration. Next, we'll look at types of data that we looked to integrate in this case. With this type of integration, there are other types of data that are possible with this type of integration, but again, we're going to look at one specific case and the types of data that we integrated. We'll also go over the approach of using a standard XML and other standard files to manage and set up this integration. And then we're gonna cover sort of the overall automation process, sort of at a high level, and then I'm going to hand it over to Michelle, who's going to speak to that automation of this synchronization process, and then go over all the details of the XML File Transfer Utility that she built, including all the configuration, the workflow, the error handling, and logging and notifications. Michelle has also planned for us to see the utility in action today, so go over some of the components live on the call, and then we'll cover some lessons learned from this experience, and then open up the floor for some questions at the end. So with that, let's get started. Okay, so let's start out with any sort of challenge that our clients are facing and any potential solutions that we create. One of the things I'd like to look at is what are the industry trends? What's really driving what's driving from the industry? What are the trends that are driving some of these challenges and some of these business decisions? So what we're seeing from the industry is general increase in cost for drug development. So we're seeing over 70% of costs in R&D are related to clinical trials. So an increased amount of spend across clinical development, clinical research. And so companies are looking for ways to reduce those costs, right? We still want to maintain the amount of studies that we're doing and the amount of products that we're generating, but we want to look for ways to reduce costs in R&D. And a couple of options, or a couple of ways that clients are trying to reduce costs is, one is implementing technology solutions like enterprise solutions like Siebel CTMS to sort of decrease that overall cost. And the second way is outsourcing, right? Outsourcing on a variety of different levels, but one of the main areas of outsourcing is obviously outsourcing to clinical research organizations from a clinical management perspective. So some of the outsourcing trends that we've seen over recent years, really sort of puts that into perspective. We see an overall increase in spend on CRO services. So this is excellent news for those of us, or those of you that are in the CRO space. We're seeing a lot more outsourcing. So $9.8 billion in 2001 up to $24 billion in 2010, and that number is growing day by day. So we see a lot more spend on these outsourcing services. So with these outsourcing services, we have CROs sort of managing that clinical trial management data. There's an increasingly important role of CROs as part of this. So there's also a greater collaboration between sponsors and CROs. So when we talk about sort of sharing data, there's an increased need to actually share data in a more efficient manner between these organizations that we're using to manage these services. So let's look at one particular business case or one particular client scenario, and this might resonate with your organization as well. So this particular client was in the process of moving to a nearly 100% outsourced model for all of their studies. So they're leaning towards just providing oversight onto the studies that are being managed. So they're moving to a 100% outsourced model. They've identified 3 preferred CRO partners for all of their clinical trial management needs, services needs. So they're still using some small niche CROs, but for the most part, they're using preferred vendors who have a variety of different systems. So they don't all prescribe to the same CTMS system externally. So right now they're receiving regular reports from these partners. So typically that's the product that the CROs offer is reports or extracts or reporting off of the management data that they're tracking in their own systems. But one of the challenges, of course, are the reports from each of the vendors are going to be different. They may be different per study, or they're vastly different between partners, and they're hard to consolidate across studies and generate metrics across studies if you're using multiple partners. So that's the current scenario that this client was looking at. So the client needs were, they need to have all of this information from a CTMS perspective in a central repository for all of their CTMS data. So they acknowledged that need and they implemented Siebel CTMS. So they have Siebel CTMS in-house now to track this information. But again, the vast majority of site management is happening with the CROs. So they have a need to standardize reports and metrics for all of their studies across the board. They need to be able to view consolidated data in a timely manner and support real-time decisions. And they also need to minimize and eliminate data entry for CTMS data managed by the CRO. So, they have an in-house CTMS where they can sort of essentially get to that data and perform reports and do reports or metrics, but the data still lives in the CRO's CTMS system for the most part. So looking at the various options that this organization has in front of them, one of the options obviously is to have CRO personnel manage your studies directly in your CTMS. So you have everyone sort of within your CTMS following your process and doing and getting that data directly in your system. The drawback to that is obviously we're relying on CROs that are they have a process in place, they have systems in place, and the reason that we're choosing them as preferred partners is because we like what they do. So to have them use your system and your processes and train them, it sort of defeats the purpose of potentially using some of these organizations. So what this particular organization was looking for is a scalable integration where we can actually just extract data out of their CTMS or have the CRO extract data from their CTMS and then put it into the central CTMS that we have in-house. So the scalable solution would mean that there's no need to train CRO personnel on the use of the in-house CTMS. The CRO resources can scale up, scale down, or change as needed without impacting any sort of data sharing because we're getting data directly from the system. And if we design it in such a way where we're just using a standard format across multiple CROs, this can actually be used with as many CROs as desired. So if each of the CROs adheres to a standard format, you can actually, later in the process, if you're scaling up another CRO or scaling down a CRO, your integration still remains intact. You're basically just ramping up, ramping down additional partners to integrate with. So this potentially saves time otherwise spent on data entry, data conversions, ensures higher quality of data across the studies because we're utilizing the standard approach and integrating automatically, taking the human sort of error potential out of it. We're also putting in automatically checking for errors, so error handling, checking for business rules, sending notifications when errors are found to the appropriate parties. That sort of ensures sort of the business rules are being followed as well through integrated data. And it provides clean data to the sponsor as quickly as desired because the interface schedule can be determined by the sponsor, so you can run it daily, you can run it twice a day or multiple times a day. And then the decisions, the reports that are being based on that data are as real-time as we can integrate it. So here's an overview of what this sort of looks like, right? So we have we have our 3 CROs on the left-hand side. So each of the CROs are providing standard format files to our overall integration flow in their respective folders. So each of those folders will have multiple studies potentially from each CRO and multiple files per study. Then the XML Transfer Automation Utility pretty much takes it from there. So what Michelle is going to go through basically will pick up all of those files, move those files to the respective folders within the client Siebel XML folders, verify that everything that's been transferred is actually valid, put together an integration log, and actually kick off the process that's going to the integration process that's going to process all of the business rules and track all the errors down to the field level and then load it into the CTMS. So this XML File Utility is doing a bit more than just transferring files. It's actually doing a lot more of the file level and transfer level error handling, as well as kicking off the processes that load the CTMS, in-house CTMS database. So this CRO integration takes into account, for this particular client, takes into account the majority of what we consider the meat and potatoes of CTMS, and which is going to happen down at the site level. So site level entities, site level data that we're entering, like addresses, accounts, contacts, activities, document tracking, protocol deviations, site visits, subject visits and CRFs, and adverse events. So all of this information that's being tracked at the CRO's CTMS, this integration is set up to track all of that automatically, or import all of that automatically into the in-house CTMS. So again, this is the types of data that this particular client went forward with. There's actually additional ones that we're going to go and update this integration to capture more information at the site level and even higher levels. But virtually everything and anything that you're tracking as a standard, or your CROs are tracking as a standard, we can actually build this integration to do just that. So the only requirement to any of this is that the study and the region level, the protocol, the region level within Siebel CTMS is actually set up. So once it's set up, the rest of the following data can be automatically imported through this utility and integration. So the approach that we took is an XML based approach. So we've created standard XML file formats for each of those data entities that we're expecting to integrate to. So we have a standard format, standard naming conventions, so the integration can identify the files. We also have within the file name different components, so we can process multiple files in a day, right? So we have date and time, we have a sequence number, we have the CRO ID or the source. If you have multiple CROs, each file will identify which CRO that file is from, and also the study ID or the protocol identifier within the file name. So each of those are part of the file name, and we verify that. The layout of each of the XML file formats is predefined. So this is something that took a lot of sort of discussions with each of the CROs as to what level of data that we're expecting down to the field level, field names. So we've put in tag names and expected values. So if there's list of value fields, we have expected values for each of those defined in sort of a data contract with each of the CROs. So that prescribed XSD is something that the CROs sort of sign off on. And then the last thing we have is this end of EOT file, which is the end of transfer file. This is sort of a fail-safe that we put in place where, when they're sending, anywhere from 1 to 15 files, we want to make sure that we don't process anything unless we've received everything that the CRO is actually meant to send us. So if something failed in between, we want to make sure that we don't process anything. So this end of file transfer comes through after all of the files that they meant to transfer are actually there. So if the end of transfer file is not there, or the XML file that's listed in the EOT is not in the folder, the system is going to generate an error and not process those files any further. So again, there's a lot of error handling, error logging that's happening as part of this utility, even before we start loading data and doing any sort of business rules. So this is the approach that we took to minimize any sort of errors around transfer and incomplete files that may have been sent. All right. So that's it for me to sort of frame the discussion around the business case and what sort of approach we took. So with that, I'll hand it over to Michelle to go into a little bit more detail around the XML Transfer Utility. Michelle?
Thank you, Pram. Okay, so this is actually a diagram that Pram has already talked to, and I'm just going to speak about the parts that are related to the automated utility for moving the files over and registering them with Siebel Clinical. I want to draw your attention here to the beginning piece. Like where do these files have to start? I will actually open up what the content of the files are. I know Pram has talked about different formats and different types of elements that can be specified for each of the files. So I'll show you exactly what that looks like in a demo environment. But just know right now there's all this data, and this data has to go somewhere. So all your CROs are putting it into this FTP location, the secure FTP location. And typically it's set up so that each CRO has their own folder, basically, and I only have access to that folder. So you can have 3 CROs, you can have 100 CROs. The utility is set up so that this can all be configured to a configuration file. So if you have additional CROs to be added, you just have to modify the configuration file, and the automation utility will automatically grab that. Now, after these files are actually located into the FTP folder, then what we have is the automation utility, and this is the piece that's actually scheduled to run on an iterative basis, generally once a day. And what it will do is go out to the FTP folders and find all those files, and it will do some error handling and some processing on those files. And then from there, it will move it into a configured, let me erase here. It will move it into some configurable local folders. So in our case, we set it up to be a shared drive. And the shared drive has certain locations that we want these files to be put on. And this shared drive is something that our Siebel Clinical system has access to. The transfer utility will put the files into the folders, and then it will register it with Siebel Clinical, and then Siebel Clinical will have access to these the folders that they were moved to actually go ahead and put it into the Siebel Clinical system. So that's the basic gist of it in terms of what this little utility is doing. And as Pram said, the biggest thing about it is just how does it handle it when things go wrong. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. But first, I did mention that the utility was designed, and this is just sort of a business requirement that we don't want to have it be hard-coded for a specific CRO. There could be more CROs added. There could be some changes. And so what drives this whole automation utility is a configuration file, basically. And this is where you set up, where we set up the basic, what is the database that we're using, what's support, where is our FTP server, and then it has the transfer utility. In addition, we wanted it to be able to be run behind the scenes and not necessarily notify someone every day that it ran unless they want to be, but do notify someone in case of an error. And so there's an ability to configure email with the utility so that if there was an error or if they wanted to be notified every day, it could be set up that way. But the administrator would automatically get those notifications real time. And that, again, is configurable based on this config file. And then another aspect that's really important, if you look down at the bottom here, I'll get my little highlighter out. Boom. Okay. This is actually the most important piece, is that you can just keep adding these sections to the config file for each CRO. So my first CRO, I give them a name, and I say where are their files going on the FTP server? Where do I want to put them on the local path? And there's also this ability to archive out the files. And I'll speak more about that as we go, why we have the actual two options. So that's the basic of the config file. And then we get into the workflow. I'm not going to go through this in painstaking detail, but I will highlight a couple of things. One is that I did speak to, this is something that's scheduled. It's run on an iterative basis. And the way that it's designed, it won't overlap or try to process anything that's still being transferred, kind of thing. So we don't have to worry about synchronizing up when the CROs are transferring it when we run this, because the system will automatically know about that. And then the other thing is, it reads the configuration file, and then it comes in here and starts asking all of these questions. And all of this is error handling, basically. It says, oh, well, first of all, is there a new CRO to process? And if not, we say, well, that's kind of strange. Or in this case, I think it's not strange. It's okay if there's no files there. It could send a notification email if configured to do so. And then it says, okay, if there are new files to process, then okay, let's go and do all the errors. Were there errors found? Okay, yes, stop, roll back, send a notification. And then it starts to go through the process of, okay, looks like we're ready to go. Now let's retrieve those files from the FTP server, and let's put them into a local directory. Let's see if I can get my eraser to work properly here. Thank you. Okay, so then it says, okay, we're already here. We've got all these files. Let's get them now and bring them down and bring them from the local or from the FTP server to my local directory. Now it says, were there any errors? And by errors, what it's doing is it's checking the size of the file on the server versus the size of the file locally. Was there any problem transferring the files? Did the files all get transferred as expected? So all of these things that can go wrong during a transfer are checked for by the utility, because the last thing we want to do is obviously lose any data or not know that we didn't process anything. So it's doing a lot of checking on that part. And then it's going through, and again, it's going to say, okay, did we find any errors? If we did, stop processing, roll back what you did, get it back to its original state, and then you notify the administrator as well. After it actually gets those files all into the local directory, it goes ahead and runs this procedure, which is written by Param's team, that registers the files with Siebel Clinical and kicks off the whole integration process and determines what data gets updated and how and all that kind of stuff. So, and there's a couple other cleanup steps that happen. So that's the basic gist of what this automation utility is doing. Okay, and again, I'm talking a lot about error checking in this, and I guess that's kind of the point of the whole, why do we do this development? It could be pretty simple to simply transfer files, but we had to make sure that everything worked along the way. Was the connection okay? Do the directories we referenced exist? Or are we able to connect to the SFTP server as well as the database? And then we have these EOT files. I'm going to show this to you because it's a really cool concept and way to make sure that we're getting all our data across and we're only processing things that have already been all transferred in entirety. So I'll show you the way that those work, but those files allow us to ensure that we're not missing any piece of the puzzle that the CRO is maybe still sending. And then does all the transfer success. trying to see was something partially processed, and we thought it was fully processed. Were all the files able to be retrieved? Were we able to, and then it goes into registration checking, were we able to register everything? And then could we archive off the EOT and XML files? And so this archive directory keeps coming up here, so I'm just going to mention what that's about. When we're dealing with transferring the files between these systems, it's almost in different stages. Like initially it's on the FTP server, and then it gets pulled into a local directory, and it gets registered with Siebel Clinical, and then when Siebel Clinical processes them, it removes those files from the local directory after it's done. But just as a way to have these, there's the ability to configure the automation utility to just keep an archival of all the files that were transferred and available to be processed, and the number of days that it's there can also be specified. So we can say, okay, keep these files on hand for 30 days or whatever. So that's another aspect that, again, it's making sure is happening correctly. Okay, so we're going to keep going. There's lots and lots. I'm going to skip over this slide. It's here if you need it. I'm just going to say again, it's checking if it transferred right, and it has a whole bit of logic it's going through if there are any errors and notifying and whatnot. And then the other aspect is this whole logging and notification. It can be set up to send a summary email to the administrator at the completion of the job, and that could be sent every time it runs if that's what the administrator wants. Or it could just send in the case that a file, for whatever reason, a transfer had some error, and it says what the error was. And of course, it keeps a detailed log of all the processing actions. And this is mostly just for troubleshooting and keeping us on our toes, and not just like having something not work and not know about it. We'll know about it because it'll let us know about it, and I think that's pretty important. So with that, I'm going to show a demo of the system here. I am going to share, I'm going to start with the application share. I think that will just transfer over better here. So just bear with me for a moment while I select the right applications. Okay, so Eugene and Param, if you're not seeing, I'm not seeing anything right now. It's just a second. But if you're not seeing my screen or seeing what I'm talking about, please speak up.
Yeah, right now I see Notepad.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So the first thing that I wanted to show is just what these EOT files contain. I mean, the EOT end of transfer file is really just like a table of contents. So when these files are being transferred by the CRO, they don't send the EOT file until after everything's been sent. So I would expect the address.xml, the account.xml, all these files to be there, and then the EOT file will be there. And so then the FTP utility or the automation utility will only look at the files that have EOT files. And that's how we know we're not taking anything while it's still being processed. This is strictly just a listing. And then as part of this listing, we have these XML files, and this is what Param was talking about. There's different elements within each of these, and this is something that the CRO would have to be able to produce, and the different variables and pieces of it would all be pre-specified. And here's the format we want to see the data in. So here's your site, and here's an account, and let's take a look at like a contact kind of thing. Here we have the site source ID, the protocol number, all these kinds of things. So this is actually the file that gets, these are getting downloaded and put in a local directory, registered by Siebel Clinical, and then some process within the Siebel Clinical side is going to take this in to the system. So that's what that looks like in a gist. So let me see now if I can get to the server. I'd like to show you now the configuration file. Eugene, can you see this? Is it coming up okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Okay, so this is a configuration file. This is a pretty standard format. We have a lot of comments in here describing what the different elements of this configuration file are doing, and that's just to make it manageable by the client, so they know what each of these things do. So of course we have like admin email is specified here, and environment name and all that kind of stuff. But the other part is, I talked about these emails being sent, and so like if the administrator wanted to be notified of every time the job ran, you would say job success emails are on, or you would say it's off, and then same with the error emails. You could have them on or off. In this case, since it's sending one for everyone, we're not sending both of them, but it can be as you wish. And then this archive directory, we could have it just indefinitely have the files be saved in the archive directory for manual management down the road, or we could have it set up that it clears everything that's older than a certain number of days, and then you can specify that too. And that's all done through this configuration file. And then at the end, I sort of showed this on the slide, but this is actually real live. This is actually a path I'm going to show you from the demo. That's on the FTP server where the first CRO's files go, and then here's my local path, and you'll notice it's on a shared drive here, our SACBAC drive. And that's where it's actually transferring it to. And we have a queue directory and an archive directory, and we have the same thing for CRO too. So, if there were more CROs, you'd have more of these, and you could remove them if they were no longer relevant as well. Okay, so this one, I believe I am showing the FTP server. It looks like another directory here. So this is actually the FTP server, and you'll notice I have these two directories, one for CRO1 and one for CRO2. For CRO1, I have an end of transfer file here, and then I have some other files with no end of transfer file. So there's actually nothing to transfer. Well, we're hoping that it doesn't touch these files because this would be analogous to something being in process kind of thing. And then CRO2, again, we have an end of transfer file. I think I can look at this pretty easily, yeah. And this is actually listing out what other files are in the system. And so I actually have some error conditions set up here as well. We're kind of showing you that as we go. I'm not sure I shared this one. Just a sec. Let me make sure. All right, this one, now what I'm looking at here is actually the local drive. And so on my local machine, I currently don't have anything in my CRO1 folder, and in my CRO2 folder, I don't have anything either. And now what I'm going to do is just run this. It's a command line system because it gets scheduled through the back end. So I'm just going to run this program. It's going to go off and connect to the FTP server, identify which it needs to process, and it's going through, and you'll see all these messages. And this is really for troubleshooting to know what happened and what didn't happen. And if you look at, let's see if I can mark here. So the first thing it did is it went through processing the first CRO, and you'll see that it went through and found an end of transfer file. And then it went through there and said, hey, wait a second, it's missing a file. It doesn't exist. I can't actually transfer it. So it doesn't actually pull that over because it's missing a file and it says something's wrong with this. And that's when an error condition would be sent to the administrator. But then if you look at CRO2, it says, okay, I got this end of transfer file here. And I went through and I see, okay, it looks good, and I'm retrieving all the files associated with it. I'm confirming the sizes on the server and the FTP server and the local drive. And then it's going through, and if there's an error, it actually spits out an error at the end of the day. So it looks like my demo setup didn't actually have the right file. It's missing a particular file. So actually it's going to end up not transferring anything. That was not the condition I was trying to set up. But in the case that it did actually transfer, we would have seen something appear down here in the CRO folders, but we're going to see right now that they're blank, which is kind of what we expected in this particular case. So I guess I'll have to take my word for it that if I had all the files in there, it would have transferred everything over over into the local directory and then registered it. So the other last piece to take a look at is that there's always an ongoing log of everything that happened. And this is really just exactly what I showed you on the screen, is that it's being captured in a log file for review. And that way, you can kind of see the history of how this job worked and which things got processed and whatnot. So that's the demo, and I'd like to just open up the floor for questions. If you have them, feel free to type them into the chat window. And I'm sure Eugene mentioned this, but I'll just mention it again. Anything that you type into the chat window, it won't be seen by any of the other users, and that we'll read the question and answer the question, so you can do so anonymously. So feel free to ask questions.
Great, thank you. So feel free to ask your questions, like Michelle said, and we'll get started on the first question that we had come in so far. How well do the Siebel CTMS and the integration to CROs cover country-level data points, milestone dates such as initial, current, and actual dates, as well as submission and approval data points on study and country level?
Okay, so I can answer that. So currently with this initial version of the integration, we covered everything site and below, but the Siebel CTMS application can obviously track region and country level data in terms of milestone submissions and documents and things like that. So if your CRO is tasked to do that, right? So the first thing is, technically we can build the interface to capture that data and map it to region level or country level documents or activities and things like that. But your CRO obviously needs to have the ability to track that level of data as well. So if your CRO is tracking country level documentation and submissions and milestones for you, then we can certainly integrate and bring that information into your CTMS through the same mechanism, right? And just capturing region level data from the CRO. And in fact, for this particular client and others, we're actually doing that as well. So in the next version of this particular interface, we're actually going to be tackling country level data points that the CRO is managing for the sponsor. That also says it can integrated data can and should be able to live within the database, within the application, side by side with data that you're tracking internally as well. So if you have country level, region level, protocol level, and even site level, milestones and activities that you're tracking internally, that should be able to be done side by side within the application. So integrated data and user-entered data should be able to reside within the application in the same way.
Great. And following up on that question, this person asks, what is the work effort of extending the interface/integration to cover study and country level data points?
So that's a hard question to sort of put in easy terms. So we need to understand what level of data that we're looking at. So how many data streams essentially. So if we're looking at region activities, region documents, so each XML sort of data stream has relatively a similar amount of effort against it, but what's going to make that effort sort of increase is the level of transformations we need to do on our side and business rule checks that we need to do on our side. So if there's a significant amount of required fields or certain list of values and things like that, we need to sort of code that all into the integration. So I'm sorry I don't have an easy answer for that, but once you determine the complexity of each data entity, the approach is the same, right? So you're still getting an XML file, you're still sort of putting it into the same sort of black box, but it's the business rules that need to be coded against, and building the logs and the error handling around the data that we're expecting, which is the most level of effort.
Great, thank you. So the next question that we have is, much of the presentation was about the transfer of files and technical checks, such as connectivity, files expected, etc. How did you handle CRO data which violates business rules? For example, a site is created with an investigator which is not a contact in the CTMS, or a site initiation actual date is in the future. In one scenario, the business rule may be enforced on Siebel screens. In another scenario, it may only be enforced by business process, but needs to be enforced in the interface mechanism.
Okay, so I'll address that one as well. So you're right. So the main topic for today was the XML File Utility, which handles sort of more of the technical piece behind initiating the integration and doing error checks around just the mechanism of the integration. The business rules for each of the data entities or the data that we're importing into the Siebel application, that all happens within sort of PL SQL routines and other things that we're doing on the database side. Once we've gotten past the gate of, yes, this file is ready to be imported. So that's when we run all the checks around whether the required fields are met, whether whether list of values are violated or not, and even things like your date example. So all of that would have to be sort of coded within those PL SQL routines, or in sort of our staging area once we've loaded those XMLs into a staging area before we load the system using the integration objects that we've built. So and I'm trying to see whether we can actually show, whether I can show what that error handling might look like. So what we've done is, and I'm going to share my screen real quick and show just a very simple example. I can't share too much here, but should be able to share this particular piece. So in this example, this is so we've built an interface log around this integration within the application. So if you're looking in Siebel, you can see every account of when this integration ran. You can see how many records were processed, how many records were failed, things like that. So this is sort of the error log screenshot that shows required fields are not populated or missing LOV values and things like that. So we've built the error handling and error logs directly in the system, so that your interface administrator could sort of essentially man this interface, right? So once you receive a notification that there's an error, you don't have to go into log files. You can actually go directly in the user interface and see what processed, how many records failed, and what you need to do to fix that. So if it was a required fields not populated, you can go back to the CRO and have them update that data, or you can make those updates, in the XML file if you feel inclined to do that, right? But essentially, this interface log and interface error log is to facilitate that communication between your interface administrator and the CRO. So if you have those mismatches of data, or something wasn't set up, let's say the protocol wasn't even set up and site information came through. So it would, in here, it would say something like, the protocol doesn't exist. So that's an error on your side, on the sponsor side, that you need to set up the protocol, set up the region, so that the site information that's coming from the CRO can be processed appropriately. So that's the level of error checking and handling that we can do, that we've done on our side from a business rules perspective. And specifically to your other example, where let's say a contact doesn't exist and a site is about to be created, there's a couple of different things that you can do. One of the things that we've done on our side is to assume, like if we can't make a match on a contact that already exists within the system, it'll actually create a new record for that contact and assign a source ID to any record that's being created by this integration. So let's say Dr. Jones came through, Richard Jones came through, and we had a Rich Jones in the system. So it's not going to find a match necessarily, but it'll create that Richard Jones and it'll assign a source ID against it in a multi-value group. So later, once you're doing sort of this reconciliation within the system, so let's say you find Rich Jones and Richard Jones, if you merge those records, even if they were on multiple different sites, it'll actually merge, and if you have two different source IDs attached to two different records, it'll actually merge those and assign both source IDs to the same record, so that next time Rich Jones comes over with the original source ID, it'll map it to the Richard Jones that's in the system according to our contact source ID mapping. So there's a significant amount of work that we can do to minimize those errors and actually flag them to account for those types of business rule violations.
Great, thank you. The next question we have is, how well are the reporting domains supporting both sponsor internal data points and CRO data points transferred via the integration? Is this an out-of-the-box feature?
Not sure I understand that question. So how well are the reporting domains supporting both sponsor data points and CRO data points transferred via the integration? So, I mean, and maybe while I'm trying to answer this, you can put in a clarification question in there, but I'll attempt to answer it. So, I mean, the main driver behind this integration is so that the sponsor can, generate reports, generate metrics across all studies, whether they have in-house studies or they're fully outsourced across multiple CROs. So the need is to have that all in a central place. So, it's really supporting the sponsor's internal data points and the reports around that are going to be supporting their key performance indicators and the data that they're interested in. So the CRO data is obviously a big part of that. So the reports that we typically generate or create in the system are covering both the sponsor internal data points from an oversight perspective, but also CRO. So you can actually see the progress of both organizations within the same study, right? So if there are key metrics that show how well your CRO is doing, you're able to get to the data, and if there's key metrics from an oversight perspective to show how well you're doing as a sponsor in terms of oversight, those are included as well. So the main driver is to get that reporting and those metrics across both of those key points of progress, and that's what this integration is typically doing. And from that perspective, once you enable this integration, you would have that capability within the system. I hope I've answered that question, and if not, feel free to send me an email, and I can certainly elaborate.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we have a few minutes before we end the presentation, so we just want to conclude with the lessons learned for this project. So I'll pass it over back to Michelle and Padam.
Tom, I think you can take this one.
Okay, sure. So the lessons learned from this integration, and we've done a considerable amount of integrations in the past. One of the things that I think really stand out in the way that Michelle has sort of designed this is configurability of the system. So, everything that we had put in that design of the configuration file really allows that flexibility for the organization. So, the ability to set up the system with multiple CRO sources, the ability to change that, right? So to add additional CROs, to the mix without having to recode anything around the integration. So it's a matter of updating the configuration file. Ability to control some features within the system. So you saw the capability of, turning on notification features, turning on, emails and things like that. So all of that flexibility sort of resides within that configuration file, and also connection information. So when you're processing files from, in a multiple environment capability, so so you're pointing to multiple environments, as you're testing and validating this, you're able to control those connection information in the configuration file as well. So, I thought that was a hugely successful approach in doing this, because it allows that flexibility. So as things change and as, different partners are processing different things, or different partners are coming up to speed, you're able to do that in a very, very nimble and quick way. It may not be so easy for your CRO to get that nimble, but on your side, your integration is there, and you're able to control that configurability through that configuration file. One of the things that's really important, communication and documentation between team members, clearly defining the requirements, development meetings to go over the requirements, and system technical design specification. And this was important, obviously, from a delivery standpoint, right? When we talk about delivery of these kind of complex systems, just from within the delivery team of CTMS, but the communication and clearly defined sort of expectations with the CROs was obviously, a key driver in the success of this project. So anytime that you have this type of, complex sort of integration, it pays to have those clearly defined well in advance. So like the XML standards, the end of transfer, the frequency, basically the data contract with the CRO needs to be in place. And then the design of the system to capture errors. I mean, we've talked a significant amount of error handling today, when it came to just the file transfer, and making sure that everything that the CRO did transfer actually made it through. And when we process it even further, that nothing has changed. So checking file sizes, things like that, is considerably, a key success factor in this integration. So I think that the approach that we took there, where with the end of transfer file and things like that, again, allow us to have a more flexible integration system that knows what we're expecting. And then the automatic notifications allow the system to be run sort of hands-off, right? So you can set up the notification so you're only receiving a notification if there in fact is an error or a warning, so otherwise you're never going to get bothered. Or you can get a daily notification of, we've received X number of files, X number of records, that type of notification where, the successful run of each of the interface batches can be sent in an automatic notification as well. So it doesn't require you to sort of watch over the interface. And the log files, like I showed in the screenshot, just from a business rules perspective down to the data level, data and field level, you're able to see those directly in the application rather than having to dig through some logs as well. So I think each of these things are really key areas where I think we contribute to the success of this interface. So,
great, thank you.
Right.
So, thank you so much, Padam. So we are out of time, and here you see some contact information. You can contact either Padam, Michelle, or you can reach us at the general life sciences info email address. This webinar is being recorded and it will be sent to you within the next few days. And you can share it with your colleagues. If you need any further assistance, please don't hesitate to contact us. And look forward to having you join future webinars. Thank you so much for attending and enjoy your day and evening. Take care.